drawer flung open and Elvis is standing there. And he has this long flashlight and he's flashing it around. He says, "Who the hell locked this door?"
Just after midnight on July 7, 1972, a 22-year-old Linda Thompson met the 37-year-old Elvis Presley for the first time at the Memphian Theatre in Memphis. Linda, Miss Tennessee, and her friend Jeannie LeMay, Miss Rhode Island, were invited to the night of movie watching by Linda's friend, singer T.G. Shepherd.
Elvis used to rent out the theater at midnight when everybody had gone, and he would screen movies until 4 or 5 a.m. So we parked outside at midnight and went in, and David Stanley, his stepbrother, was standing there talking to us, and Elvis, we heard somebody knock on the door really loudly, and somebody went and got the door, and the door flung open, and Elvis is standing there in a black suede cape with a high collar, red satin lining on the cape, black pants with a red insert and the flare, and he has this long flashlight and he's flashing it around. He says, "Who the hell locked this door?" I was coming in this way, and they were all going, "Oh boss, we're sorry, we thought you were going to come in the front door." "No, hell no, I wanted to come in this door." And he's like yelling at everybody, and then he flashes the light in my face and says, "Well, hello, honey." His whole demeanor changed, and then the gentleman Elvis walked over to me and said, "How do you do?"
As Linda described in her 2016 book, A Little Thing Called Life, she boldly teased Elvis that night by saying, "Kind of dressed a little like Dracula tonight, aren't we?" Elvis laughed. At this point in time, Elvis had been separated from Priscilla for 6 months, and they were in the process of getting divorced. But Linda did not know that.
And I thought he was still married, so I had no designs at all, or, I was just like happy to meet my idol. And then he came and sat next to me in the movie theater, just kind of plopped down after the movie had started. And I was kind of like, okay, this may not be on the up and up. So he started pulling the old yawn, put the hand around the seat, and I remember and Jeannie LeMay was like almost breaking my ribs. She was like, ah! And he started kind of like nuzzling me and stuff, and I said, "Jeannie, we have to go, we're leaving." He said, "Honey, you know I'm not married anymore, don't you?" And I said, "Well, no." "Really?" So he said, "No, I've been separated since the end of the year, since December or January." He said, "And we're getting a divorce, and she's met someone else, and she's moved on." And I said, "Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but you should have married a Southern girl." And he never forgot that. I know, isn't that crazy? He never forgot that, though. He said, "You're absolutely right," because he and I did grow up with the same values, the same cuisine, the same familial love, the same importance put on family and home, and the fire and all that. So he got it, that he should have married maybe someone that had more of his same spirit and upbringing and understood him maybe a little better. We were kindred spirits. We were like, I know soulmates is way overused, but Elvis and I truly were kindred spirits. We absolutely got each other. We understood each other. It was like we had known each other, pardon me, all our lives. Pardon me, that's him. A little frog in my throat. It was as if we had known each other all our lives, because we essentially had. We kind of grew up in the same way, and so we understood the ins and outs and the nuances of each other.
Linda got her first kiss with Elvis that night. In her book, she described what it was like to kiss him. If you want to know what it was like to kiss Elvis, get the biggest, puffiest marshmallows you can find, and press a few of them against your lips, because his lips really were that sweet and soft. He was the most mesmerizing kisser, so very sensual and intense.
We might have made out a little bit after I found out he wasn't married. Yeah, we did. We sat there and we talked, and we interrupted everybody else's movie watching, and we talked and we kissed and we talked some more and we kissed some more, and he said, "Well, I want to see you. Can I get your number?" And I was still trying to play it coy, I think, with beard burn. After a couple of hours, there were 2 features. Neither of us ever remembered what was playing because we didn't pay attention to the movie. We were talking, and
The movie doesn't matter anymore at that point,
no.
Right?
So I made him do the work, which I didn't realize was very uncommon for him because Joe Esposito, did everything for him, made all the phone calls, did everything. So I said, well, I don't have a pen or a piece of paper to write my number down. And he said, well, I'll get something. And it's so funny, he got a matchbook and he actually wrote it down himself, my phone number. I was staying with my Aunt Betty Sue. And so he wrote down Aunt Betty's number. And as we were leaving, as Jeannie and I were leaving, I said, what kind of idiot am I that I didn't just write down in big bold numbers what my number was and put it in his pocket? I said, he's not going to call me. He may not have even written the number down right. So I was kicking myself all the way back to Aunt Betty's house, and it was like 4 a.m. by the time we got back there. And Aunt Betty met us at the door. She was awake. She said, well, did you meet him? Because she had grown up, as a big Elvis fan as well. And Jeannie said, not only did she meet him, she was kissing him, he was kissing her, he's not married anymore, he really likes her, he wants to see her again. And because he had said, I want you to come to Graceland tomorrow night, I want you to meet my dad. And the phone's ringing, and it was Elvis. And my Aunt Betty went to the phone and she said, hello, and she still talks this way, by the way. She's 84. She said, hello, why, hi, Elvis. Why, it's nice to hear your voice. Yes, Linda's right here. She sure is. Well, Elvis, hon, I'm going to get Linda for you. Hold on just 1 minute. It's Elvis Presley. I just talked to Elvis. I said, Aunt Betty, shh. So I go to the phone, and apparently I didn't know then that he took prescription sleeping aids. But he sounded like sleepy, and I said, are you tired? Were you drinking? And he said, no, honey, I don't drink. And he didn't. And he said, I don't drink. And he said, I'm just wanted to tell you how happy I am that I met you tonight, and I want to see you. I want you to come to Graceland tomorrow night and meet my daddy. And where have you been all my life? And I've been looking for somebody like you my whole life. He was like going on, and I said, okay, well, I'll be there tomorrow night. So Jeannie and I went to Graceland the following night, and I met his dad, and he was just such a respectful gentleman. He was really an old-fashioned, respectful Southern gentleman.
Linda would go on to date Elvis for the next 4.5 years.
His nickname for me, after we'd been together for a while, was Mommy. He called me Mommy half the time, which sounds kind of odd now, I guess.
As Linda Thompson described in her memoir, A Little Thing Called Life, the first year she began dating Elvis Presley, starting in the summer of 1972, they were together 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As a result, Linda says it felt more like they were together for 10 years instead of 4.5.
Years we shared sort of equates to 10 or 12 years in a normal life, because in a normal relationship, you go to work, you come back, you meet for a few hours, you have dinner, you go to sleep, the next day you're both off doing your thing. And with Elvis, it was so intense, it was so 24/7, it was, I'm going to the dentist, I want you to go with me. I'm going to the doctor, I want you to go with me. So there was such togetherness that it really did equate to about 10 years, it felt like. He was a very, for lack of a better term, he was a very needy person. When he said he wanted me to be with him, he wanted me to be with him, period. 24/7 and 7 days a week. And for that first year, we were together without any breaks at all. Even when he would go take a shower or something, can you just kind of wait outside? And okay, I'll be here with a towel. He wanted to know that I was ever present in his life. And of course I felt honored, and I was so connected to him at that time. I didn't even want him to be out of my sight, because I wanted to care for him and love him and make him feel secure too. And I think maybe because he had been left and had his heart broken, it made him a little needier and a little less secure. So I tried to understand that and respond to that.
As Linda observed, in addition to feeling deeply wounded by his divorce from Priscilla, Elvis greatly missed his mother, Gladys, who had died in 1958 when Elvis was only 23.
He was the original mama's boy in the best way. I think men who love and honor and respect their mothers are the best men. And if you're lucky enough to have a wonderful mother, and he was, he was so close to his mom and really adored her, and that was such a tremendous loss for him to lose her so early in his life and in his career. And he referred to her often, and it sounds kind of, a little heebie-jeebie, but at Graceland sometimes I would feel her presence. I could just kind of feel her spirit, because I do think the one thing that we leave behind when we go, and the one thing we do take with us, is love. And that was her middle name, Gladys Love Presley. So I really feel that she left such a beautiful spirit of love behind, and of course took his love and Vernon's love and everyone who knew her with her. We don't take material possessions with us, but we can take the love with us that we've given and that people have given to us. So yeah, his nickname for me after we'd been together for a while was Mommy. He called me Mommy half the time, which sounds kind of odd now, I guess, especially since he was a bit older. But it felt really natural at the time, and he called me Ariadne, and I do believe that having suffered that deep loss early in his life left him feeling vulnerable and sad. Like he used to say, I'm intensely lonely at heart. That was his terminology. I feel intensely lonely at heart. And I would counter, with, but honey, look at the gate, look on the monitor there, look how many people love and adore you. And he said, I appreciate that. And he said, but they don't know little Elvis. They don't know the little me that grew up here, and the part of me that's still like a little boy, and the part of me that is vulnerable. They just know Elvis on the marquee. They know Elvis, the performer, and they don't know me. It's not a personal love. And so he was very mindful of that.
Linda accompanied Elvis to Hawaii in January 1973 when he performed the Aloha from Hawaii concert. She was sitting in the audience that night. Linda says that Elvis sang the song, Welcome to My World, for her at the concert. It was a song used in one of her beauty pageants.
It is true that you have to separate the human entity, the fallible human entity, from this larger-than-life presence that rocked the world, really, and today is still such an iconic figure. And it was interesting to segue from this cute little guy in his little silk pajamas eating honeydew melon in the middle of the bed and dancing while he's eating his honeydew melon, and the human entity that he was, with the sweetness and the sense of humor and the loving nature that he had, to go from that and the intimacy that you share with someone when you live with them, to sitting in the audience dressed up and watching him in his stage attire, performing like, still it's the best show I've ever seen in my life. He was the most incredible performer ever in the history of entertainment. And I've seen just about everybody. He was amazing. So to go from the sweet little human entity that, would share his deepest fears and feelings with me, to watching this powerhouse of a performer, it was, a little bit daunting, and you had to kind of wrap your head around it every time. But I say in my memoir that I wrote a couple of years ago, we do people a tremendous disservice to put them on a pedestal, celebrated figures. If we put people on a pedestal, we don't allow them to be human. And it's a disservice to those celebrated people, those famous people. They're all still just very human. Sometimes some are more human than others, and more fallible than others. And I think sometimes the greater the fame, the more it kind of etches a despair into you. It takes you away from what's normal. And I think that happened with Elvis. He had to be, kind of sequestered away, and he wasn't able to mix and mingle with people. And so it led to his loneliness. If I had to sum it up in one word, it would be very loving. He was very affectionate toward Lisa, adored her. He was just a very affectionate person. Elvis was, he needed a lot of affection, and he needed to give a lot of affection to the people that he loved, which accounts for his generous nature. But when Elvis would, like sometimes Elvis and Lisa and I, she was only 4.5 when I was first with him, And sometimes he would just gather us in a big family bear hug, and he called it mugging noggins. So he said, come over here and let me mug your noggin. And that would mean that you would press your forehead against his forehead, and he would just, go like that, and you could hear his teeth gritting. He just really loved hard. He really loved hard and fierce and deeply. He was an incredibly affectionate guy, and he adored that little girl. And, he was not like the most disciplinarian of fathers, But I get that. I'm kind of a weenie mom myself with my kids. It was like, okay, you want that? And he was a very loving person. And he said, well, I'm probably only going to say this once, but I think I'm a little bit self-destructive. And that stuck with me.
In this 2019 interview, Linda Thompson candidly shares the behind-the-scenes truth about her relationship with Elvis Presley during the years 1972 to 1976. And why she and Elvis finally broke up.
Elvis, I asked him one time when we were sitting and having a philosophical talk, what do you think is your worst flaw? And he thought for a minute, and he said, well, I'm probably only going to say this once, but I think I'm a little bit self-destructive. And that stuck with me, in the later years, because he recognized it, but he had already started the downward spiral, and I don't think he could stop it, or he felt that he couldn't. And you have to remember, in those days, there was not Betty Ford, there were no rehab centers that there are today. We had the Dr. Knott and a Dr. Fink. One time, I woke up and once I realized that Elvis took sleeping medication and sometimes some other things that maybe interacted with that, I was like having a newborn baby. I wouldn't sleep. I wanted to know he was okay. So I would sit and watch him until he fell asleep, and then I would get up all through the night and had a pattern of wakefulness, really, to check on his breathing and make sure he was okay, because sometimes he wasn't.
It was so tough for you.
It was exhausting. I have to admit. I was a young girl, but it was still exhausting when you're not sleeping. And also just emotionally exhausting, because this is the person that I loved more than my own life, and watching him slowly self-destruct, and not being able to do anything about it. I didn't have the facilities, I didn't have the education, I'd never done drugs, I'd never even drank alcohol, I never smoked a cigarette. I was like, I didn't know how to deal with this, except to be there and to try to keep him healthy. And so there was this one morning that, he wasn't breathing properly, and I had to call an ambulance, and the ambulance came and got him. And there were several times, like that, where it was really frightening. And I just, after a while I thought, I do want to get married, I do want to have children, I want to be a mom, and this is not the kind of life I want to bring a child into. This is not... I finally just thought, I can't spend my life trying to keep him alive. That shouldn't be anyone's lot in life. And he had begun to see other girls. When I wasn't with him, I knew that he would be with someone else. And you try to reconcile it in your mind and in your heart. I get it. He's so sequestered from other people. I understand if he wants to be around someone new and talk to them. And I knew it wasn't always about having sex with someone else. It was about reading those books and connecting and, getting a little taste of the outside world and what was going on. So logically, I tried to reconcile it in my mind, but emotionally, it's hard. When you love someone, you don't want to think of them with another woman. So it kind of all came to, a point in my life where I just thought, I don't think this is the life that I want to sign on for. And we were in San Francisco. He had played the Cow Palace, and he was playing the Cow Palace again the next night. And he said to me, honey, I was thinking maybe you'd want to go back to Memphis and spend a little time with your family. So I brought the Jetstar in, I brought the plane in to take you back. Logically, I knew he's not going to bring his private plane in at that expense just to fly me back to Memphis. He's brought someone else in to go to the show. And that's exactly what had happened. But I said, no, I don't mind flying commercially. I like to fly commercially. I can be around, some other people. He said, no, I brought the plane in just for you. And I said, are you sure you didn't bring another girl in? Because there had been rumors that he had started dating a girl in Memphis a little behind my back. And I said, are you sure you didn't bring someone else in? And he said, honey, I would never. He was so darn charming. And I'll never forget standing there with him in the hotel room. And he said, look at me. I love you. I don't love anybody else. You're my little Ariadne Pennington. You're the one that I love. You're my heart, and I don't care whatever you read. Then he's like starting to think, she's going to hear about this, isn't she? He's like, so honey, I want you to know, no matter what you hear, no matter what you read, no matter what anybody tells you, I don't love anybody else. I love you. I'm always going to love you. And I said, okay, I love you too, knowing that he was lying to me. He was not telling the truth. I know he was telling the truth about loving me, and probably at that point in time, I was the only one he loved. But, you know, he had a tremendous capacity to love, and I'm sure he fell in love with the next girl like he had been in love with me. So I left him in San Francisco, not of my own will, but because he had brought the plane in. So I left, and that's it. You know, it's a song. I left my heart in San Francisco, but it happens to be the last time I ever saw him alive. And I did speak to him on the phone a few times after that, and I just, because I had this haunting feeling, you know, I just thought, you know, I don't know if anybody's going to take care of him the way I did. I don't know if anybody's going to be attuned to his needs. When you're with someone for that many years and that closely living with them, I felt very attuned to his habits and his needs, and I thought, nobody else is going to know that. So I remember calling Graceland, pardon me, the Friday night before he died on a Tuesday. And Friday night I called Graceland, and Charlie Hodge answered. And I said, Charlie, hey, it's me. And he said, hey, Linda, how are you doing? I said, good. And Elvis and I had been talking on the phone. And I said, can you do me a favor? Is Elvis up? And he said, no, honey, he's sleeping. Will you do me a favor? Will you just go upstairs and peek in the door and make sure that he's breathing okay? And Charlie was a little impatient with me. He said, he's fine, honey. He's all right. He's asleep. I said, just, you know, humor me and please go up there and just check on his breathing. So whether he did or not, he pretended to put me on hold and came back to the phone. He said, he's fine, he's okay. And I said, his breathing is good? Yeah, he's fine, he's doing just fine. I said, okay, well just tell him that I called and I love him and I was just checking on him. He said, I'll let him know, that'll make him happy. And I didn't speak to him again. And then Tuesday, I got the call from Lisa Marie. She said, you know, screaming on the phone, my daddy's dead, my daddy's dead.
In this 2019 interview, Elvis Presley's former girlfriend, Linda Thompson, describes where she was when she heard the news that Elvis had died.
I was at my apartment in Los Angeles, and Elvis had actually come and spent some time with me there in the past. And it was still, the memory is so surreal because Lisa Marie would call me from time to time. She was only 9 years old, but we really shared a connection as well. I love little kids, so I adored her. I just thought she was, you know, the sweetest little thing and funny. So she would call me from time to time and just say, hey, it's Lisa, I'm playing, I'm in the golf cart, and blah, blah, blah. You know, and she would just be really excited and letting me know what she was doing. And this time, you know, her voice had that same intensity. She said, Linda. I said, hey, honey. She said, it's Lisa. I said, I know who you are, you little goober nickel. And she said, my daddy's dead, my daddy's dead. And I just, it was stunning to me. I just, no, he's not. She said, yes, he is. They just told me my daddy's dead. And I said, no, honey, I'm sure he's not. I'm sure he just, maybe, are you sure he's just not sick? Remember the time I had to call and take him to the hospital because his breathing wasn't right? Remember, maybe he's a little bit sick? No, he's dead. They told me he's dead. Nobody knows, but they told me he's dead. And she said he's smothered in the carpet. And I just threw the phone across the room. And I was just saying, no, because when she said that, I thought, that's it, he's gone. And I have chill bumps even thinking about it now. And I threw the phone across the room because I couldn't even bear to think it. And then, you know, my reasoning came back to me, and I thought, there's this little 9-year-old girl who had the presence of mind to pick up the phone and call me. So I reached for the phone and had to say what I could say to Lisa to comfort her, you know. But, I mean, to this day, I still get emotional thinking about it, you know. It was a terrible time. And he, in fact, had passed away. And my brother had gone to get Lisa to bring her back to LA because Elvis was going on tour. And my brother, Sam, picked up the phone and said, "Linda, you need to come back to Memphis." I said, "Sam, just tell me he's not dead, right? He's in the hospital, he's not." And he said, "You need to come back home. He's gone." It was just like the world stood still. I mean, how many of you remember that day and where you were? It's like, you know, I think those of us who loved him, everybody remembers that day. They remember when President Kennedy was shot. They remember those moments in history when there was a tremendous loss to all of us, you know. So my brother said, you gotta come back. And so I, you know, made my way back to Memphis, and, you know, life was never the same. I remember, in fact, watching TV, watching the news, and of course it was all over the news and all over every newspaper, and the news account would start off, "Today Elvis Presley died at his Graceland mansion in Memphis, Tennessee," and they would, you know, talk about that, and then they would go on to something else that had happened in the world, and I would go, "No, there is nothing else. That's all there is. Elvis died." You know, I couldn't imagine that anything else was newsworthy. And that's how I responded in my grief. It's just like, there's nothing else. That's all there is. You know, Elvis is gone.
The world changed. The world changed that day. Not
my world changed, for sure.
Yeah.
Looking back on her time with Elvis, Linda describes the best gift Elvis ever gave her.
What's the best gift he ever gave you? And I'm sure they were thinking about jewelry, furs, you know, cars, whatever, house. I said, his love. That the greatest gift that he gave me was his love. And I still feel that to this day. I still feel honored and fortified and comforted with his love, knowing that he loved me purely, and more than that, his knowledge that I loved him very purely. It meant the world to me when he passed away, knowing that on his last thought of me would have to be one, she really loved me. He knew I loved him without any other, you know, ulterior motive, without any agenda. I loved him so purely and so deeply, and I know that he knew that, and that was the greatest gift, to know that he passed away feeling confident in my love for him without any agenda. But as far as lessons that I learned, you know, he was a walking example of generosity and kindness and goodness and love. He was flawed. I'm not, you know, he was not a saint, you know, he was not monogamous. He had a prescription drug problem, but he was the embodiment of Santa Claus. You know, he derived more joy from giving than receiving, truly. And he was generous of spirit and his time and energy as well. I think one of the biggest lessons that he taught me is that we all have a responsibility to life. We have a responsibility to ourselves to dig deep and see what our gifts are, because God gives everybody a gift. It could just be, you know, making a sandwich for someone better than anybody else can make a sandwich, or it could be writing a poem or a song, or it could be being a nurse or a doctor. Whatever your gift is, you know, discover your own inner gift, your own inner quality, and just give that freely to the people around you, because we all have a responsibility to each other, to love each other, to stand together, to know that there is a common thread that runs through all of us. We are all human beings, and we're all connected in this time. And, you know, those are the ways that he thought. And he really taught me to be more introspective and to not only reach in, but to reach out to other people. And that was a wonderful legacy that he left behind.
Regarding the 2022 Elvis movie, any significant relationship that Elvis had after his divorce from Priscilla, including with Linda, was left out of the film. Linda addressed this during Elvis Week 2023. Quote, "I know what I meant to Elvis. I know what he meant to me," Linda said, And that's the most important aspect of viewing any film or reading any book. I didn't see the film, Linda revealed. I lived it and I know what the truth is in its fullness, so I don't need to see the films and I don't need to read the books. I know my truth and what we meant to each other. Unquote. And read more in Linda's 2016 memoir, A Little Thing Called Life. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like this video to help this channel grow. For more fascinating facts about Elvis, pick up one of Trina Young's 4 Elvis books. Read a free excerpt at elvisbiography.net. Please subscribe to this channel and ring the bell for notifications of future videos. Continue to watch more videos about Elvis here.